Chapter 5. Machinations. Interior, Casa Paradiso, Apartment 8. Night. Chris has taken Dan home to his warm-toned apartment, the floors partially covered in clothes and miscellaneous debris. Dan sits in a battered armchair, stroking the fur of a sleeping Mr. Mumbles as he stares blankly in the air. Chris assembles an insane timeline aloud.
So,
Chris begins, running a path into the green carpet with his pacing.
Adam tracks you down and steals your identity. He flew away,
Dan mutters.
Then you get him sent to prison for 6 months. He flew away,
Dan repeats, voice flat as a morbid EKG reading.
He gets out, becomes a telemarketer, and gets you sent to jail for 6 weeks for attacking him. He flew away. And now,
Chris says, poking the air for emphasis,
he empties your bank account for, quote, a friend, turns into a demon, and he flew away? Right,
Chris affirms, persistent of his pacing.
Wait, Chris!
Dan shouts, snapping from his catatonia and lunging forward as if breaking from invisible chains.
Stop moving! I'm having a brain smart.
Dan strains his eyes shut, trying his best to massage a coherent thought through his temples.
Adam was a telemarketer, stole my money for a friend, and turned into a demon. That means the friend is...
Dan hops to his feet as a startled Mr. Mumble scurries to Dan's room with a screech. The same thought hits both of them like a stroke of lightning. Their fists slam to their opposing hands as if having called rock in a game of Rochambeau.
The boss!
They shout in unison.
Oh my God!
Dan continues.
But how?
Chris asks.
Didn't we send her back to hell?
Dan rubs the hairs of his soul patch between his thumb and forefinger, mulling it over.
Well, demons are hellspawn by definition, Chris, so we basically gave her a cab ride home. Yeah, I guess that makes sense,
Chris replies.
And why aren't you more surprised about all this?
Dan inquires.
My brother is a demon. Because he's a telemarketer? I've already told you they're evil, Dan. I'm just glad I got out before it was too late.
Dan squints his eyes at Chris with piercing suspicion. He says, closing in on Chris's personal space.
What? I'm on to you,
Dan replies, wagging an accusatory finger.
Dan, if I was evil, would I have helped you with that ration between your... Okay.
Dan interrupts.
You're clear for now, but Elise is definitely a succubus. I'd watch my back if I were you. Sure, Dan, sure.
Dan walks over and leans against his foosball table in thought.
Darn that Adam,
he starts.
Thinks he's so cool because he's a demon. I've been promoted,
he mocks, hips swaying side to side with each syllable as he makes a silly face. Chris sits down, legs finally at rest, but Dan's already been crafting a plan to deal with their situation.
Okay, so here's what we do. First, we need resources. Simple stuff like a tank, acid, a 5-gallon water jug, nuclear missiles. Where do you keep your missiles, Chris?
Chris's flummoxed expression is near palpable. The annoyance from Dan's absurdly casual list sets in.
Dan, why would you expect me to have missiles?
Dan, frantically tossing his arms of exasperation, barks at Chris.
Well, I don't know. How do you deal with people who've wronged you?
I eat, Chris replies with a shrug, biting down on a chocolate bar that seemed to materialize from thin air.
Besides, you're talking about actual demons. Last time that happened, I ended up in a burlap sack in front of a portal to hell. Yeah, but I did save you, didn't I?
Dan replies with an innocent smile, his eyes playfully fluttering. Chris smiles warmly at Dan, recalling the very fact.
Yeah, you did. Wait, no, Dan, I'm not getting into this again, so you can just forget it.
His assertiveness demonstrated, he calms himself.
I should go home. Elise is probably waiting for me.
Chris turns his back toward Dan, walking toward the front door. He places his hand on the knob, but just before he turns it, the sound of familiar packaging caresses his eardrum. Chris peeks an eye over his shoulder, Dan tempting him with a shuffle of a party-sized bag of Chris's favorite cheese puffs.
Would you do it for a Scooby snack?
Dan suggests, his voice smooth with allure and a charming smile. Chris turns a dismissive head back toward the door as if to suggest that he'd not be tempted, but again peeks over his shoulder.
The whole bag, Dan,
Chris demands.
Of course,
Dan replies, handing the bag to a now elated Chris as they walk out of the door together.
You're lucky I'm hungry,
Chris says.
By the way, Chris,
Dan starts, muffled behind the door.
Back at the police station? Curmudgeonous? Really? Yeah, I know, but it was on my word of the day calendar.
Interior, exterior, Chris's car, night. Chris is heading home to enlist help from Elise, Dan sitting in the passenger seat. They've been cruising for a few minutes with the alternative metal station on faint volume, Chris eating cheese puffs with one hand and driving with the other. But he's overcome with concern.
You've reached Elise. Leave a message at the tone, and if this is Dan, we're busy. No answer again,
Chris says, placing his phone in the center console with a clunk.
I'm really starting to worry. Chris,
Dan begins.
She's a big girl or something girl adjacent. I'm sure she's fine. But what if Adam got to her or something, Dan? I can't be left with just you. Well, if I'm such a chore,
Dan scoffs.
You are, Dan,
Chris passively replies.
You really, really are. Well, be that as it may or not be that, Elise is fine. My brother's after me and he knows I don't care much for her. I guess you're right. What about your money? Have you forgotten about that? Oh, not at all,
Dan responds, taking out his notepad and running his finger along Adam's name.
I'm gonna get my money, but this is more important. I'm gonna put Adam in his place for good this time. Well, I hope for all our sakes you're right about
music broadcast to bring you breaking news.
Dan smacks his hand over Chris's mouth, the radio having caught his attention.
Chris, shush!
He demands.
Exposition.
He continues, slowly adjusting the volume dial to hear the male voice.
If you're just joining our broadcast, Terrific-Guy is back, making an arrest of a bank robber after being gone for over a year.
Terrific-Guy? Really?
Chris exclaims.
Shh.
Dan replies, turning up the volume even louder.
So tell us of your daring return. We heard you lost your powers. Is that true, Terrific-Guy?
Oh, yes.
Terrific-Guy responds, voice resonating with deep power.
It is true. However, after infiltrating a thinly secured space program, I was able to commandeer their spacecraft where I flew into space and bathed in the sun's mighty glow, restoring me to full strength.
Oh my!
The reporter gasps.
You mean you actually stole a government spacecraft?
No thanks needed, citizen. I simply heard the Earth's cries and answered her call to justice.
All right, Chris.
Dan calls.
Turn it off.
He continues as Chris obliges.
God, that guy's a piece of work. Oh, what, Dan?
Chris asks.
What are you gonna do to him now?
Dan smashes his notepad in Chris's face as he begins to swerve.
Dan, I'm trying to watch the road. Look at Terrific-Guy's name. Crossed out. I've already gotten my revenge on him.
Good to know. Oh, hey, you want to hit Burger File? I've mostly been snacking all day and the drive-thru closes in like an hour.
I could eat.
Chris reaches a traffic light that beams with red, stopped just behind the frontmost driver. Chris patiently waits, but a growling, arm-folded Dan is never a good sign.
Chris!
Dan starts, his grumbling voice laced with frustration.
Just go around and drive through it.
Chris hovers a matter-of-fact finger in the air, resting his eyes in haughtiness.
No, Dan, there are rules, and unlike some of our demonic brothers, I'm not a criminal.
Dan punctuates his anger by slightly but swiftly reclining his seat, enough that his feet could reach the dash. He hoists his feet as the heel of his right foot begins pounding of impatience. The light turns green, but the car in front doesn't move.
Are you serious?
Dan shouts at the absurdity. He reaches over, rapidly honking Chris's horn.
It's green!
He continues, witnessing the female driver applying makeup in her rearview mirror.
Dan, stop!
Chris shouts, shoving Dan's hand from the steering wheel.
I'm sure she's almost done.
Dan opens his door, steps out, and begins stamping in front of Chris's windshield. He reaches the driver's side of the front car and flings the door open, the woman gasping and nearly jumping from her skin. Without a word, Dan snatches the woman's foundation compact from her hand, tossing it to the next lane over before a car runs it over. The woman shrieks a frantic yelp as she slams her door and speeds off. Dan retreats back to his seat, relaxing in his still reclined chair while Chris finally drives ahead.
Dan,
Chris calls in monotone.
Was that really necessary? We're moving, aren't we?
Dan shoots a goofy grin at Chris in silence. Chris looks at Dan, trying not to be swayed. Dan's expression intensifies, his mouth almost formed like tiny squiggles. After neither could hold it, the two burst into laughter, Chris first to break their silence.
Okay, it was funny, mostly the way she screamed. See?
Dan replies.
You just gotta enjoy it sometimes. You're a bad influence, Dan. Yeah, I feel warmly toward you too, Chris.
Exterior, Chris and Elisa's home, night.
Say, Dan,
Chris calls as they walk toward the porch.
About the boss, didn't we just use holy water on her last time? What's with all the other stuff you mentioned? Ah, but you forget, Chris, there are two of them now, maybe more. There has to be some contingencies. Besides, she came back. This time, they won't.
Dan and Chris enter the home, Chris expecting to be greeted by Elise.
Elise, honey?
He calls, but no answer returns. Chris rushes to the bedroom, flinging the door open.
Elise?
No answer. He dashes to the garage.
Elise?
Chris runs trembling fingers through his hair in a panic, breathing as if oxygen were endangered.
She's not here, Dan. Well, yes, she's dead then.
Dan indifferently replies. And this concludes Chapter 5, Machinations.